All right, everyone. Welcome to our next module. This is culturally responsive pedagogy, or CRP. This is really what this class is about, as far as looking at the needs of culturally diverse students, linguistically diverse students. So let's get to it. All right. So what is CRP? Gloria Billings is not the only name in this, but she's definitely a driving force. Basically, looking at, how do we provide social, emotional, um, how do we provide for these students with social and emotional needs because they come from different cultures. Definitely, it started as a way of looking at minority students, but it's grown as the world grows and we all become a little bit closer neighbors. For better or for worse, I really like that fact. But it's just looking at culture as a means of um, helping the student. So what it does, really, this is really just about looking at students' backgrounds, employing these backgrounds into the classroom, bringing these cultures out as a way of, if you can imagine being a student who is new not only to the school but to the country. With a whole another skill set and background that's very unique from their peers, really helping that student feel comfortable in to bring that out. I can't say enough how strong the statement diversity as an asset and not a deficit. Really looking at these new cultures in the classroom as a way of growing the whole classroom and really giving the traditional students a unique perspective on things, and just helping build experiences, and showing different backgrounds. So step one to building a culturally responsive school is knowing your students. Identify the students who are culturally and linguistically diverse. You know, Looking at their backgrounds, and just identifying who those students are and looking at their particular needs. All right, so student biographies are also a really great way of doing this and asking these questions to help build a kind of an idea of who your student is, where your student's coming from, and just a kind of an idea of what their life is like at home. If you've got a student who is if English is not the language spoken at home, what challenges are they going to face when taking schoolwork home? If they need help and they're not in the classroom, where do they turn? So step one is looking at what language is spoken at home. When we talked about WIDA, that was one thing that most schools, when you have a student come in, that's part of a questionnaire that their parents fill out is what language is spoken at home. What is the student's preferred language, and that kind of gets a baseline as far as whether or not they're going to be part of the WIDA program, which is typically what most schools in Missouri use, or just an ESL program. Also looking at, and I have found this to be the case, of what language are parents literate in. Not all languages have a written aspect to it. In fact, a lot of my Somali students, they're if you go back to when we looked at the cultural profile with Somalia, there's two major groups in Somalia. There's Somali and then there's Bantu. And without getting into a big thing on just going back to that Somali cultural profile, a lot of the Bantu were not allowed to become literate. They weren't taught how to read or write. So, it's not uncommon, if with refugee kids, that their parents may not have a written language that they can identify with. And so, what challenges does that face? If you send home anything from a report that a parent needs to look over, or a field trip flyer, that a parent needs to sign, it's not uncommon to see those signatures come back and they look a lot like the child's signature, because the parent doesn't read or write. So, you know, it's just something to think about. And that's all about, finding that, just asking those questions, finding that information. I know it kind of seems like poking and prodding, but really the intent is to be able to work with those students in the best way that we can. So getting those questions answered is big. Okay. And this also includes interests, experiences, prior to their arrival in the U.S., what stories do they have to share? So it's not all, interrogation kind of questions, but it's just kind of forming an idea, getting that background knowledge. All right. Build relationships with parents and caregivers. This is huge. Going to visit parents in their own home is a big step, and it is a very scary thing to leave the nest of our school and our safe school building and get out to these areas that may not be the nicest areas. It may be a real eye opener of some of the struggles that some of our students go through, and just it's hard. If you can imagine from the parents' standpoint, coming into a new country, especially if they don't speak the language, trying to find employment, housing, enrolling kids in school. I mean, it's a lot. It's a big thing to tackle. So, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but it's you want to build that relationship at home as well, and that could be anything from phone calls to as I said, the best thing would be visiting the parents, visiting those homes, seeing where your students are coming from on a daily basis. Um, so another thing that we can do is bringing parents into the school, and not just in a disciplinary way. Showing parents that the school is there as a resource for them as well as their children. It's just huge. All right. All right. English language proficiency. So this would be that the state testing. Um, so making sure that if you have a student come in, I know for me, I also teach art, and I'll get we've had an influx of Congolese kids come in, real smart. They don't speak any English because they're brand new to the country. They speak Swahili, but they're as middle schoolers, they're very bright kids. It's just the language barrier. So one thing that I like to do is go visit the administration and get those WIDA scores as soon as they're available. What that does for me is it allows me to get an idea of what my students' strengths are, and I can work with those. So say their speaking skills are low, but they have a little bit higher listening skills. I know that I can at least use simple language to work with them. Maybe they have writing or reading skills that I can kind of lean on to help with getting my instruction, which is art, to them in a way that's meaningful to them. Also, it means that I can work on helping build on some of those areas where they're struggling. So, just because we're not reading teachers per se doesn't mean we can't help supplement that reading, because at the end of the day, if they have those reading and writing and speaking and listening skills, they're going to do well in all classes. And just another note, students have to be placed in grade levels based on age, not their English language proficiency. So a lot of times you will see students who are at middle school, but they'll be at what is referred to as like a third grade or a fourth grade reading level, depending on what kind of reading program they go through. But yeah, it has to be by age. Excuse me. Planning and implementing. This is it's important to have some thought ahead of time when especially when you're looking at students with culturally diverse needs, and looking at what how are we addressing language in lessons. I think that really should go no matter what you're teaching, and really even who you're teaching, whether or not that is U.S. native born students or uh, culturally diverse students, really it's important to always look at language from reading to art to shop class to PE. It's all about language, and I think you find that it's always there, even if it's not at the forefront. But look at language. What psychological needs do our students have? Are they bringing trauma in? Outside of just coming to a new school in a new country with a new language. I mean, that's a lot. That'd be pretty overwhelming. So look at those psychological needs, social and emotional needs of our students. With those cultural profiles we've looked at, think about the social aspects for Latino students wanting to working best in groups. Um, it's and what emotional needs are they coming in with trauma? If they are coming in from like a refugee camp, what does that mean? And it's just about asking those questions, getting that baseline, that biography is huge. Also, academic, and that goes back to the WIDA scores. Where are they at academically? Um, remember, they're just because they're new to the country and new to the language doesn't mean they're new um, to education necessarily. I mean, that could very well be the case. I've had a fair number of students who are just in school for the first time, and that's a big step for them. So, where are they at, and it's and planning around that. All right, so monitoring through WIDA, there is a monitoring process even after they pass the WIDA score or the WIDA test, the access test through WIDA. There's still, I think it's 1 or 2 years of monitoring that goes on while they're still in the ESL program. But it goes beyond that, looking at emotional and psychological needs and what are they, just kind of keeping tabs, really. And I mean, this happens easier than you might think. It's once you build relationships with students, just kind of keep it in touch. If they move out of your grade, um, you still will see them in the hallway, just stopping by, doing check-ins, just forming those relationships, looking at their academic progress, looking at their social involvement. Who are they with? What groups are they following? Is it helpful for them? Um, Looking at their potential, just forming those relationships. And as I said, this comes more naturally than than you might think. All right. What to do if a student resists being identified as cultural representative? This is a big thing. As you can imagine, growing up, everybody rebels to a certain degree, and this is definitely the case with you know kids that come in, especially from very very different cultures, are from my experience and also from research that I've seen, most kids when they come in and they start going to American schools, they want to Americanize, and that's all about being fitting in. So, identifying with pop culture, identifying with styles of their peers, they want to be cool for all intents and purposes, and their parents are not cool to them, as we all probably identified with growing up. Parents aren't as cool as your friends, so there's this need that they want to identify with, and that's Americanizing, um, YouTubing, if as you will. So it's students will really kind of reject their culture to a certain degree. Now this is a broad statement. Obviously, this is not the case with all students, but it is pretty common. Um, you know, and this is where we, as you know, culturally responsive teachers, need to really step in and think about how we can not force their culture back on them, but maybe show them the unique aspects of their culture that really make them representative of a something different, and that's a really cool thing to do. And that is, you know, making them proud of their heritage is a big thing, because you don't want your students to grow up and then resent the fact that they kind of push their culture away, and then having to come back into it. So just showing them that their culture is unique and that they should be proud of it. Another thing that we always want to be kind of aware of is not forcing our students to constantly represent their culture as a single student. You don't want a student to feel like they're the Somali kid or they're the Latino kid. Um, so not it's all about balance. Not pushing too far or not pushing enough. All right, so ways to incorporate students' home culture in teaching. Um, I think that having students research about their history, famous historical, artistic, or sports figures from their culture, um, usually is really enlightening, and it's kind of a good way to to help students promote their culture um, in a way that is meaningful to them, because they're looking at something that is interesting to them, whether or not that's history or art or sports or really anything, and looking at how somebody who is cool has also, shares that that cultural identity. Um, Try not to relegate culture to holidays um, and food. So, making it. I always struggle with this in my art class with Day of the Dead, as far as Latino culture, and I it's a making sugar skulls is a great project. My students love it, but also making sure to identify Latino artists in a way that isn't just around a holiday. Um, I think one of the best things that we can do on a consistent basis is look at the names that are in our reading prompts and our math problems. If you change the names in word problems to culturally responsive names that identify with your student uh, population, changing a Chris to a Juan, makes a big deal. It seems like something small, but if it helps a student identify and feel a little bit more comfortable, I think that's a big step. It's a small task for a big payout, in my opinion. Um, Make the physical space of schools and classrooms um, reflect various cultures. I think that this is really cool. This is posters, just facts about different cultures, different heroes that represent different cultures. I think that's a great way. It's an easy way to make things interesting, and also just as I said, bringing that culture into the classroom. All right, so things we can do. Um, Incorporate students' cultures and examples. So, we talked about like word problems, posters, decorating the room to be culturally diverse is just cool and it's interesting. Learn a few words in a student's language and try to use it. I love this. And one thing that learning, if you have the ability, the time, and the willpower to learn 3 or 4 languages to use on a rotating basis, then that's amazing, and you should be paid a ton of money. Realistically, that's a huge undertaking. So what I have found is really great is learning just a few simple things: hello, thank you, and great job. Um, those are great ways to just kind of icebreakers to get in to talk to a student and to help them and just help them feel comfortable. They know that there's a language barrier, and just showing that you are taking steps to help them feel a little bit more comfortable is a big deal. It'll form relationships very quickly. Learning how to pronounce the students' names, that's a big thing. I know it's kind of tough, especially if when we start getting some names that are just unfamiliar to the tongue. A lot of Arabic names, you really have to pay attention to how you say them. But it just takes a little bit of practice, and it's worth doing. And it's a respect thing. Um, things like religion and open discussion. If you make things taboo, it will be treated as being taboo, and it shouldn't be. Um, using students' names when creating assessments, we talk about that with word problems. So, when talking about culture, show respect and appreciation. I think that it's also important uh, to not ask. Don't be fearful of asking questions. I think that that's a big thing. If you approach a student and you are honest and inquisitive, make it an opportunity for a student to teach you something, and that's big. And just be wary of overgeneralizing, which is I feel like that's something that is tough for me teaching this class, like with cultural profiles, about generalizing. Obviously, people are individuals, and individuals have their own traits, and we just want to make sure we're not overgeneralizing. This is typical of this culture. This is typical of this culture, because while there are certain norms, that's not necessarily going to be a consistency. So